Well, hello, an extremely warm welcome to my channel. I'm Louise. A warm welcome if you're a returning viewer, and an equally warm welcome if you have visited my channel. If you are visiting my channel, let's get my grammar right, for the very first time. So I'm going to do something today which I don't normally do, and that is to report back immediately on 3 of the books that I selected to read last week. I was going to say last month. I've just noticed the light's completely changed outside, so apologies if you're getting all sorts of floating bits of dust in the air. It really is time I gave my library a spring clean, but there we are. And also if I've suddenly been plunged into darkness, but hey. I'm actually in a little bit of a hurry today. I wanted to make this video, but I am off shortly to go and see the wonderful Natalie Haynes on her book tour. She's promoting No Friend to This House, which was my book of the month for this month. And I've been lucky enough to see Natalie perform a few times, and I am really, really excited. But before I leave, I wanted to talk to you about these 3 shorty books that I chose for Shorty September. I kind of wish I'd chosen more because it's not yet the end of the month, but I've managed to whiz through them. And what I'd forgotten about short reads is the fact that you get, I mean, it's obvious, but as you're doing it, as I was doing it, it really brought it home that you're going from different genres, you're going from different moods, you're going from different style. There's something really, really refreshing about a short burst of short flurry of different books. The first one that I read was, in fact, I think I might have started it when I spoke to you last week, Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. And I would describe this as a really, really charming read. There is something really gentle and understated and genteel about the writing of this novel. By the way, I would like to clarify that Satoshi Yagisawa is actually male. In my ignorance last week, I was very honest about the fact that I wasn't sure. I should have just turned to the back of the book because obviously there's his biog at the back, but for some reason I didn't. And I found this book really poignant and gentle. It tells the story of a young woman who has just discovered that her boyfriend, who she's been with for at least a year, has been unfaithful to her all the time. He's actually been dating somebody else. And the reason she finds this out is in the most brutal of ways. Because he just says to her, I'm getting married. And it's brilliant at the beginning because she kind of questions the grammar of that sentence because it doesn't appear to include her. And then the penny drops. And she is utterly, utterly crushed. She walks away from her job because they'd worked in the same workplace. Her life sort of begins to spiral. She becomes very insular. But none of that is dwelt on. There's no sort of sense of self-pity. There's just this quiet concern, I would say, on the part of the writer about the character. And then her mother interferes. But again, we don't see that happen. We just see the aftermath. And the young woman has an uncle who she was very, very close to when she was little. And he was a little bit strange, a little bit different from other people that she knew. He's quite, I suppose you'd describe him maybe as a little bit of a hippie. And he owns a bookshop on a street full of bookshops. Now, we're all readers. You wouldn't be watching this if you weren't readers. And one of the things I loved about this was the setting, because not all the novel, but the sort of predominantly it's set on this street and in Tokyo. And it's a street full of bookshops, and each bookshop, I suppose it's a bit like Hay on Wye in the UK, each bookshop focuses on something specific. So the particular bookshop in the title of the book, her uncle's bookshop, focuses, I think if I'm right remembering, on contemporary literary fiction. And she's offered a room in the bookshop because obviously she's not working, her funds are running out. She needs somewhere to sort of gather her thoughts and restore herself to normal life. And she arrives at this bookshop and it's really uncomfortable. She's not been there before. She's not seen her uncle for years. He's quite unusual. She doesn't quite know how to read his behaviour. And he shows her to this room, which, you know, she's got cooking facilities, she's got a bathroom in the bookshop. But what she hadn't been told was that, you know, the room was going to be sky high with books. And she's not a reader, you know, she doesn't really read. And that is actually a very important part of the, I mean, there isn't really a plot to this novel, but part of the sort of concept of the novel. And I just found this utterly joyous and life enhancing, because what happens is that, and we're not giving anything away, what the writer focuses on is the relationship between her and her uncle's estranged wife, her step aunt, I suppose you might describe her as. No, her aunt originally. And her aunt comes into the story. And again, it's kind of looking at the way that when you're younger, how you view the older generation, and how your relationships with people that you knew as a young child can completely be transformed as you get older. There's also a kind of secret buried within this book, a very kind of emotional secret. It explores the way that we can really, really seriously misjudge each other as human beings. So there's a lot of information that's unpacked about her uncle and aunt later on in the novel, and some stunning scenery towards the end. You know, we're taken into a very different space. We move away from the bookshop. And it's also about how she manages to restore her confidence in romantic relationships as well. And at the centre of it all is the power of books, you know, the ability of books to transform and change people's lives as well. So and how you can get to know somebody through the books that they enjoy and that they read. That whole, it sort of celebrates that whole idea of when someone passes a book on to you, what that then explains about the person themselves. So yeah, I just thought this was fantastic. And the cover nearly put me off, even though it had been recommended to me. I almost didn't buy it. I sort of felt like the cover's a bit cartoony. For me, it sort of slightly trivialized the book. And maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but no, I think this is an absolute gem. And at some point, I think there are others in this series, and at some point I will go on to read them, I hope. And then a very different, having sort of been gently uplifted by that wonderful Japanese story. And incidentally, I don't know who translated this. Eric Ozawa translated from the Japanese. I thought the translation was brilliant. For me, a really good translation is when you're not aware that you're reading translated fiction, and that's how it felt. And equally, I felt exactly the same. This is brilliantly translated by Helen Stevenson. And this is Small Boat by Vincent Delecroix, and I make no apologies for the fact that I mentioned this book last week as well. It was longlisted or shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, and this had been on my radar for quite a while. In fact, that seems a bit of a pun when you know the content of the book. And as I will have explained to you last week, this novel takes on a real life event and fictionalizes the response to it, I would say. And it involves, I think it was in 2023, a boat set out, 2021, sorry, November. I mean, you know, if you think about British waters in November, absolutely freezing, and high seas as well, probably. And this is about a dinghy that sets sail from the coast of France, full of migrants, so 29 people on board. And it's very apparent from the minute that they sort of set off into the water that this dinghy isn't fit for purpose. The people smugglers are not on board. They've just given some very basic instructions, and someone's taken on the responsibility of steering and, you know, running the engine. And the consequences are utterly, utterly catastrophic. So 27 people lose their lives, including a young girl. and I think at the time that they lose their lives, they're actually in French waters, but I could be wrong. And this novel, Vincent Delecroix is a philosopher as well as a writer. Well, I don't know why I need to make a distinction really. And so he's really, really exploring questions about responsibility, about social attitudes, about how the same event can look very, very different from different perspectives, and yet the same things are true, the same facts. There are certain facts about this event that are incontrovertible, but it's all about how you assess those facts and how you investigate them. And so the novel is told from, you're inside the head of, most of the time anyway, not all the way through, but for the majority of the novel, you're in the head of a female control centre operative, who is the woman who takes the calls from the migrant who has a mobile on the boat. And she is being investigated or questioned voluntarily by a police officer, a female police officer. And one of the wonderful things about this is that the police officer and the woman who's narrating look really, really similar. She's quite preoccupied by the fact that they wear their hair in the same way, they've got some of the same mannerisms. And I think that's a really clever device that keeps making you think that, it's a reminder that they're both looking at the same event, but they're looking at it in very different ways. And what Vincent Delecroix does is he puts statements into the mouth of the narrator that appear to be really shocking, are really shocking, but he then unpacks them and doesn't unpack them. So, she is trying to make sense of the whole thing herself. And he manages to allow us to a certain degree, empathise with her standpoint, which is one that I wouldn't naturally think that I could empathise with. But he sort of zooms out and he stands back, and he actually, in a way, looks at her from more and more and more of a distance, or she looks at herself from more and more and more of a distance as the novel progresses, which I thought was a really, really clever thing to do. There's a moment, probably about 2/3 of the way through, where the narrative shifts, which I really wasn't expecting, and that I thought that was incredibly clever, because there's a danger, I think, when you're inside someone's head, that it can become, a novel can become a bit monotone, but absolutely it didn't. And even though the same sort of statements, so the inspector is sort of presenting the woman with the things that they've actually got transcripts and recordings of the things that she said to the migrants, which are deeply, deeply shocking, and they keep reappearing, and she keeps mulling. It's like she's chewing at a bone, and yet all you get is a kind of increased sense of enlightenment and sitting in your armchair reading the book, you start to deeply question your own involvement in this whole situation. It's just, I finished it a day or two ago, and it's still going round and round and round in my head. And I don't think I will ever forget reading this book. It's so important and so pertinent to the times that we're living in. I think it's a masterpiece. And then just when I thought that things couldn't get any better, sometimes I do I think I perhaps need to spend a bit more time selecting the books that I read. I don't think I'm very good at that. I spend a lot of time selecting the books that I buy, but I acquire books other ways. And sometimes I think I read things that, I don't know, I've only got so many years left. And maybe I need to spend more time reading things that are absolutely going to do what this novel has done to me. And I haven't actually finished this book. It's Mothering Sunday by Graham Swift. And the reason I haven't finished it is because I can't bear to. I don't actually want to leave the narrator behind yet. I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through. And this is one of the novels where the front cover is absolutely bob on in terms of conveying the content of the novel. So this is a novel that is set in the 1920s. And so you've very much got the kind of overhang from the war. It focuses, you're in somebody's head. You're in the head of this young servant, female servant, who lives in one of the great houses in the south of the UK, Berkshire, I think it is. So, on the London fringe almost. And so she's surrounded by wealth. And it's Mother's Day. And there was a tradition at the time that on Mothering Sunday, all the servants, the domestics, would have the day off and they would be able to go and visit their mothers, but she doesn't have one. So she could spend the day reading. She's clearly been educated. Her family sort of fell on hard times. That's why she's ended up in service. So she's an educated woman. So she could spend the day reading. She's got permission to do that from her master. But instead, she takes a bicycle and she cycles off for an assignation with a member of the landed gentry who is about to get married. He's going to get married in 2 weeks' time. And it's clear that they've had a liaison for, I think it's about 7 or 8 years. And the sensuality and the sensuousness of this novel is superbly done, I think. The vast majority of the novel takes place in his bedroom in this stately pile, and she's allowed to go through the front door for the very first time in her life. It's going to be their last assignation together because of his marriage. And you're in her head and you're observing him. And I'm in awe of Graham Smith's ability to create characters that are completely and utterly real. The conversation they have, their actions, their movements. There's an ashtray balanced on her belly, and he's smoking and she's smoking, and just the way that object is used to say so much about what they're not saying to each other is really, really clever. It really, I think, looks very, very carefully at class. It reminds me, one of my favourite ever novels in the world ever is Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. I think that is one of the finest novels ever written in the English language, and in my humble opinion. And this one, I think, gives it a run for its money. Because it's so short as well. I mean, how do you do that? It's really just an extended short story. And I say just. I actually think the short story is probably the hardest. Maybe not quite as difficult as writing comedy. But one of the most difficult art forms to execute well. And I cannot rave about this novel enough. I just think it's astonishing in its characterization, its psychology, but also what it's saying about human relationships, what we need, what we want. Oh, and the other thing is that you get the sense that this is an old woman in her 90s reflecting back on that moment in her life. So the moment, this particular day, has been instilled with such significance in the mind of the narrator that it gives it this incredible value. You feel that you are sharing that valued moment with this woman. You may approve or disapprove of her feelings towards it. you know, I'm not particularly comfortable with the way she's viewing things always. But my goodness, what a stunning piece of writing. So I really hope that you've had a dip into some short novels this month. And if you have, I hope that it's been the fantastically positive experience that I've had. I am actually now going to turn to quite a thick novel next. I think now I need to kind of, you know, engross myself in a world once I can finally bear to part with this one, in a sort of more extended observation, if you like. But I think I'm going to be reading short novels more often, and as you know, those of you who've watched this channel for a while, I'm a big fan of the lengthy tome. But yeah, what a fantastic reading experience. So I wanted to report back quickly. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. I know quite a few of you have shared your views of these 3 books following last week's video. Recommendations always really welcome. I had a few really good ones and a few reminders of things that I'd read that I'd forgotten about as well, which I always really like to hear. Yeah, so I'm off to see Natalie Haynes now, and I dare say at some point I might report back on that too, but I think it's going to be brilliant. Take care, everybody. Bye.